The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Welcome to the bonus show. We've sort of kind of jokingly, but also as a real story, talked about whether or not women in Saudi Arabia will be allowed to drive, and if so, whose permission will they need? Because as you probably know, unless this isn't an issue you've been following, that Saudi Arabia at the government level is incredibly oppressive towards women when it comes to studying, working, even being able to be out by themselves, not under the supervision of a man. I mean, really phrases that seem crazy in the United States, and yet these are still the status quos for women in different parts of the world, including in basically all of Saudi Arabia. And now finally Saudi Arabia is going to ease restrictions on women driving. It's going to allow what is basically roughly half of its population to just drive around. And of course, there's a lot sort of tied up with women driving. So we might say, what is the big deal with women driving? But if you consider that you have a society that is effectively built on the idea that women are subservient to men and under the supervision of men, and that if not under the supervision of men, they might do anything, right? Who knows what women might do if they are not constantly monitored and controlled by men. Driving does give one a lot of freedom, right? And we think about the stories around driving in the United States, the idea of getting one's license and then getting out on the road and sort of driving tied up with self-determination and all of this sort of romanticized stuff that automobile manufacturers use to sell cars. It's not all a total exaggeration, because there is a certain level of control that one has over their own literal location in the world if they are able to get into a car and drive themselves around. So there's been a royal decree in Saudi Arabia. Women will be allowed to drive. This was based on a committee that this was decided by, and it also led to the implementation of a committee which will figure out sort of how to make this a real thing, which is amazing, right? I mean, it's so foreign to the fabric of Saudi Arabia that they now need to spend time. I don't know if it's 30 days or no, they're going to actually have up to a year, June of 2018.
As a transition process?
To figure out how to implement women driving. And in the US, we're like, well, you just let them drive.
Well, I guess because they're new drivers, I mean, you have to wonder if there's any sort of driving lessons
or licensing,
period to get your license. Yeah. You mentioned self-determination as well, and it's that stuff, but it's also just as simple as getting to work every day. I mean, I'd imagine that there's going to be women in the workforce because they're able to get themselves there and back every day. They don't have to rely on a man to do it for them.
Yeah, the working part is an aspect of this, and of course, you know, Saudi Arabia will often cite really narrow and specific statistics about women working in Saudi Arabia to try to make it seem like really there's no big deal. Women are equal in society when it comes to work. The truth is that's not actually the case, and that's probably a story for a different day. But yeah, certainly it also opens up possibilities for women actually working. But the entire area of women in work in Saudi Arabia is still under the sort of paradigm of male control. That doesn't necessarily change because of the licensing change. So yeah, this is a big deal. It feels sort of obvious, and we shouldn't laugh this off as dumb or meaningless, but we still need to understand the broader context of women in Saudi Arabia.
And there's more issues here, because even though there may no longer be any legal restrictions, there could be social ones. So while you don't need to get a man's permission to drive anymore, if you talk about an individual case of, you know, a husband and wife, maybe the wife wouldn't be allowed to.
Yeah.
Because what her husband says is going to end up being more important than what the government declares in that environment.
There's still the issues of social norms, no doubt about it. Let's talk about what's going on in China. We're increasingly talking about both China and India as sort of on the forefront of really making big strides in terms of limiting pollution. And as we talked about today, and will continue to talk about with Elizabeth Colbert, these are important changes their countries are making. But at the same time, there is a question of, well, is it too little too late? And China has a new effort that's really interesting in terms of trying to basically cool down cities and also maybe even deal with the CO2 issue, which is turn the entire city into a sponge so that it can absorb water, so that it can absorb CO2 and attempt to cool down the city in some way, shape, or form. And this is an initiative that's been launched by the Chinese president. And it employs a number of different innovations. Now, one of them is what are called green roofs. And you actually have started to see some of these around Boston. There are some apartment buildings, it can be hard to see on really high buildings unless you're up above, but there are some apartment buildings with slanted roofs where you can see that there are what look like gardens, but then you look and you say, well, there's really no way to get out there. It's not a garden for people to hang out on. It's actually just the idea of a green roof to add more CO2 absorption capacity, and China employing this idea of green roofs in order to basically create an environment at the city level that is going to be more conducive to sort of bringing the environment to what we might call equilibrium. And when you think about cities and concrete and the replacement of what previously might have been big open fields, forests, depending on where you are in the country or in the world, that is a ton of surface area where you used to have CO2 absorption. You had something that related to the humidity level of the atmosphere in a much more natural way, replaced with concrete, roads, buildings, sidewalks, streets, etc. That has a major, major impact. So this is being considered sort of a holistic approach. And I'm super interested in this. And we know that China is, I believe at this point, the biggest polluter on the planet. But
Yes.
at the same time, because China has such a rapidly growing economy, if we believe the numbers we're being told about the size of China's economy, which there are people who dispute it, and there are people who question how accurately we can really measure because there's so much of an informal economy in China. But putting that aside for a second, China also has the resources to do really, really big things when it comes to climate change and the environment. So this is super interesting, and it's a new idea. It could be employed all over the world.
So there are the roofs that you mentioned. There's also additions of urban wetlands, and then they're also doing forest cities, which sounds fancy, but it's as simple as just growing more trees and plants within a certain area. I mean, I like all this stuff, especially because it seems like some sort of geoengineering that can help us with the carbon dioxide problem too.
Right.
As we learned from the interviews this week from Ken Caldera and from Elizabeth Colbert, reflecting sunlight back into the atmosphere, while it will help global warming and get temperatures down, it won't help CO2 in the oceans. And that's a much bigger deal, I think.
Yeah, that's something you need to, it's sort of a mathematical problem, right? And you need to figure out how to start absorbing some of that CO2 while ideally simultaneously figuring out how to emit less of it into the atmosphere. But those are sort of two sides of the equation. Absorb what's there and release less. And, I don't know how well we're doing with that.
You can absorb the CO2, the carbonic acid, with some sort of what is it like?
An antacid is what Ken Caldera called it, which is crazy.
Right.
It sounds like, so you're basically putting Tums in the ocean.
But
it is really what
it's
you're
not
doing.
very feasible, though, because for every molecule of CO2, you need a molecule of antacid. So at that point, it's just kind of a logistical nightmare. Why not just stop the emissions in the first place? I think that sounds more reasonable.
You're going to have to do both. You're going to have to figure out some way to sort of tackle the problem from both sides. If you want to be both fashionable and connected to messaging when you are riding your bike, Google has developed a smart denim jacket. And we've talked a couple of times over the last few years about the development of smart clothing that could maybe be solar powered and then charge your phone, for example, or whatever, right? We've talked about different types of smart clothing. Google's smart denim jacket, if you are within range of your mobile device and it's connected wirelessly to the jacket, I don't know if it's Bluetooth or what kind of connection, and if you are wearing headphones at the time, you will be able to hear a ding from a text message or an email, presumably, in your ear. You can then swipe your smart denim jacket, and then it will tell your phone to read out your messages to you in the earphones that you are wearing. So this would be presumably a safety thing if you're on a bicycle or a motorcycle and you get a ding, rather than having to pull over or doing the really unsafe thing of trying to control your bicycle or motorcycle with one hand while pulling your phone out. You would be able to just briefly take one hand off of a handlebar, maybe swipe your arm, maybe elbow to wrist, if that's the way that you have the command coded in or programmed, and then you will hear the message read to you in your headphones. So hard to deny that that's not safer than pulling your phone out, but this is also a whole new type of distraction, isn't it?
Well, yeah, I don't know. I think you can deny that it's safer because then you have your headphones plugged in at all times, and you're also trying to ride your bicycle.
So does that impact your ability to hear road noise or
and
whatever
I guess
the
you
case
can use
may
the
be.
speaker on your phone, but is that really going to be loud enough, especially if you're
no.
riding your bicycle through traffic?
You're not
Probably
going to hear that. You're not going to hear that. Yeah, I actually don't know right now what the laws are. There was a time where I thought, at least in some states, you were not allowed to drive around with headphones in.
That's true.
Because it's a hazard. You might not hear an ambulance coming. You might not hear a car screeching and look around and realize that there's someone who's out of control or something.
Absolutely.
I don't know. I don't know what the law actually is now around headphones while driving, but I see a ton of people in Boston driving around while wearing headphones, and it seems very, very dangerous to me. Now, maybe it's different if you're on a bicycle or on a motorcycle and you're not experiencing sound reduction from a car being around you. Maybe just having not noise-canceling headphones in would not really prevent you from hearing a horn. I mean, when you just wear a basic set of iPhone earbuds, those don't really have any sound attenuating quality.
I just think it's still a bad idea. I mean, there's plenty of people who won't even walk around within a city with headphones on because they just don't think it's very safe.
Oh, yeah, someone could come up behind them.
I like this new wearable technology stuff. I mean, I really hope that the watches catch on, and especially those glasses. They just have to look a little bit less dorky, maybe a little bit more fashionable.
I don't know if Google Glass is going to catch on. I feel like it's dead already. But yeah, I mean, the concept, I think eventually what we're really going to have is contact lenses that interact with your phone, and then you basically are just going to be able to see overlays in real time.
But the problem with this denim jacket, though, is it's $350, and it's not something that you'd wear every day, unless you're going to be that guy who wears the same thing every day.
Well, yeah, people wear the same jackets a lot of times all winter, even though underneath the jacket they're wearing different clothes. I don't know.
That's true. But also the problem with this is that there's a maximum amount of times you can wash the jacket.
Oh, is that
only
true?
10 times.
Ever.
And, it's denim, so you don't have to wash that too often. And actually, it's probably better for the material that you don't wash it that often.
Right.
But still, $350, and there's a max amount of time that you can wash it? I don't know.
I mean, if you spill vegan milk on the thing, you're going to have to wash it, right? I mean, you can't just walk around with those crazy almond milk stains.
If you're riding around on your bike and you're sweating, you're going to want to wash it.
Yeah, no, I agree. There's definitely questions, but it's an interesting prototype. Just wait, though, for smart underwear. You're not even going to believe what that can do for you. But that's a story for probably the post-bonus show or something like that. Okay, that's it for today. We'll talk to you tomorrow.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.